Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Lynn and today I'm going to flip the March 2024 Spellbinders Club Kits. My flip videos do tend to be a little bit long, so if you don't have time to watch the entire video, here's a look at the 4 cards that I'll be making. One is a flat, one is layered, one is interactive, and the last one is a pop-up card. I'm going to timestamp the video so you can just skip to the bookmark or the chapter that you are most interested in watching. So the club kits that I'll be crafting with today are going to be the Better Press, the 3D embossing folder, the small die of the month, the large die of the month, and the clear stamp and die of the month. So let's make these. Diving right into my flat card, I have found that ever since getting the Better Press Club, it's kind of become my go-to for flat cards because it is just so easy to get very impressive results and not need too much more than just the Better Press. I will strive to kind of break out of that and make it a goal for future flip videos where I'm using the Better Press maybe for interactive cards or pop-up cards. So I'm gonna kind of keep that in the back of my mind as a goal. But what I thought I would do is, I have these videos where I test a lot of different inks with my Better Press, and I don't think I ever tested my Kaleidocolor ink pad. The Kaleidocolor ink pad is from Sukaneko, and it has basically 5 different colored ink pads that are individual when you're not using them, but there's a mechanism that lets you slide those individual ink pads together so that you can get a seamless ombre. I'm using one called Caribbean Sea, and it's beautiful. I'm sure it doesn't surprise anybody that it has some really lovely greens, blues, and teals. And in fact, the green is a lot like the Spellbinders Peridot colored cardstock that I love so much. So really, really lovely, and it Better pressed beautifully. So I thought it worked out really well. I did also want to include a sentiment, so thankfully the Better Press does come included with a wonderful sentiment press plate, and I kind of changed gears a little bit on this one. Initially, I was thinking to use dark, sort of an aqua teal cardstock that coordinated pretty well with the Kaleidocolor inks, but I wanted to try out the Versacolor pigment ink and in white, and that wasn't quite as opaque white as I wanted. Normally what I would use if I was Better pressing with white is I would use the Stays On opaque white, and that is really good as a white. It's very bright white, and as it dries it doesn't even really fade back much at all. And so it's good to know. It's always nice to experiment to see what works and what doesn't work, but the Versacolor, while it's a pigment ink and it does sit on top of your substrate, it just wasn't opaque enough. So I switched gears a little bit and went to a lighter color cardstock, and I went with a more of a darker sort of also Versacolor teal color to ink my Better Press with. And I'm going to take that same Versacolor ink pad and swipe all 4 edges of my card base. And this is my way of cheating and having the appearance or look of an additional matte layer. So imagine, laying down a piece of solid color cardstock to get this really nice border. Well, if you're trying to stick to a relatively flat card, and my definition of a flat card isn't a single layer card, it's your card base plus at most one layer of cardstock and flat embellishments. The whole idea and premise behind the flat card is easy mailers. So anything that's gonna, not cross over that 1/4 inch thickness, that is not going to go over the 1 ounce weight limit for just a single stamp. That is the goal behind having flat cards, so that you don't have to worry about how much it's going to cost to send. Because a lot of times I add so many mats and layers that even though it's not, anywhere near a 1/4 inch thick, it's going to go over the 1 ounce mark, and that is going to trigger extra postage. So the other trick that I use often is I will die cut out the center of a panel and then die cut something else and inlay it back in so that it's still all one layer. And that's exactly what I did using the coordinating die that comes with the Better Press Club for my sentiment. Now onto my layered card. With my layered card, I am using the small die of the month, which has this really, really adorable owl. It's it might be a little bit hard to see all of the pieces because I want to keep my owl white, and I am so that's why I die cut all of the pieces white. But what I wanted to do was still add a little bit of dimension by just inking the edges of all of the pieces with kind of a nice sandy color ink. And that way it kind of looks like this owl, he's been flying around. He's seen the world. He's traveled a bit. And one of the things that I found kind of interesting is that there are what would appear to be 3 different wing pieces. 2 of them have deboss lines. And so when you see a deboss line, that's your clue that something is going to layer on top of it. And the third doesn't have any deboss lines at all. So one of the one that does not have any deboss lines, that's going to go on top of one of the wings. And then the other wing, the body actually goes on top of it. And you use the deboss lines to basically line up where the various different die cuts overlap. The other thing that I thought was a little bit curious was the, what I call like the eyebrows of the owl. They're really bushy and very full. And when you assemble the eyes and layer it on top of those eyebrows, it pretty much covers the whole thing. And it makes me wonder if maybe there's a look to this where you could maybe put the eyebrow over top of the eye and almost make it look like the owl is maybe sleeping, or if you have just one that's covered, it could look like maybe the owl is winking. So I didn't think to try it as I was assembling this owl, but I think I want to try that out just to at least dry fit it and see what it looks like, because so much of that bushy eyebrow, which I don't even know if that's really what that would really be on an owl, but that's what I'm calling it. And so much of it gets covered. So I kind of wonder if it's designed that way to give you the option for those different looks. But one thing I know is that the accessories that do come with this set are what kind of reminds me of Harry Potter. And when I start making my cards, I will often have like one idea that is kind of the spark or the inspiration, really just the thing that I can get started with. And I may not know any other aspect of what I'm going to do with the card, but I know that's an idea that I want to pursue. And so when I saw this die set and the cute striped scarf that you can create and the eyeglasses, like the really round eyeglasses, kind of like Harry Potter's eyeglasses, that's the idea that stuck in my head. And so I went with it. So I've got this striped scarf that is in Gryffindor colors. And I think I was so into the Harry Potter colors and sticking with that palette that I made the owl's his little beak and his little feet. I also die cut those out of orange, but I'm wondering if tan or brown might have been a better color, a little bit more realistic, because it almost seems like he's almost penguin colors in terms of the beak and the feet. But I didn't think about that until way after I was done and just like looking at the card as a whole. And sometimes that happens with me. I get a little bit tunnel vision in an idea that I'm completely amused by. So I wonder if that happens with you or anyone else out there. But it was definitely a thing for this card. So the accessories are really easy to layer up and they fit really well, and you can, of course, use them or leave them off, but there is also this little envelope, which is super cute. It's got a little seal even on it as a closure to the envelope, and it kind of reminds me of, how the owl comes to deliver Harry Potter's letter from the school whenever the school year starts. So that's sort of the idea that I had in my head for this card. And so I just about, that was all I knew I was going to do. I actually was initially thinking I would make an infinity shaker with the owl. But I really couldn't find shaker bits that really went with it in theme or in color. So that's when I sort of changed gears a little bit, and I brought out the 3D embossing folder, which right now I'm inking on the raised side, so the side that actually pushes into the cardstock and leaves a debossed design, and I'm doing some faux letter pressing, so I ran that through, and I've got a very kind of a very messy, because I wasn't aiming to do anything super precise or clean. And so I've got ink everywhere, even in the lower areas of the embossing folder. So it inked up not just the raised dots, but especially if you're using a smaller ink cube, this can happen pretty easily, where some of the lower levels of that embossing folder got inked up too, which I love. It just adds to the whole look of this being just a very old, aged bit of parchment, for example. And taking the same ink that I inked my embossing folder with, I am just inking around all of the edges and just splattering some of the ink in the middle too. And I got a little bit of ink on my glass mat, so I just spritzed it and dabbed my panel right into it, because, why waste it? That's one of the nice things about working on a glass panel, because you can easily clean up and kind of use all of your media that might have gone onto your craft mat. So I was looking at this, and the idea occurred to me of maybe really giving it a very distressed look. So I was contemplating whether or not to tear that embossed panel, and I wasn't exactly too sure whether I wanted to do that, but to give myself some time to think about it, I started to create a book that my owl can actually sit on. So the book is actually from the large die of the month, and there are two size books. There's one that is slightly shorter, And both of them, though, do have 2 dies. Actually, one of them has 3 dies that coordinate. But one is an outline die. And that will just cut out what you can use as the bottom layer. And then you can die cut together that same outline die with another die plate that cuts a design into your card. And from that, you can cut another layer that you can put over top. And the detailing on these dies is phenomenal. It's really, really awesome. And the look I've done in a light color cardstock on the bottom and then a darker one on top for this book. But I have also assembled books where I put the dark color on the bottom and the light color on top, and that looks great too. So you can really get a lot of versatility out of that. And since I wasn't too sure whether I wanted to do the tearing, and I only had the one panel, but I did have some leftover of the panel. I really like the torn look, and if it weren't for the fact that I chose for the color of my book the same color as my background matte layer, I think I would have actually torn this panel because I do like the look of that. But that would mean that part of the book would be really hard to see because it's the same color more or less as the background. So to kind of still get a little bit of a distressed look, what I did was, I don't have one of those distressing tools. It would probably be a lot safer than what I did. But I just took my scissors and using the sharp end of the blade, I just scrubbed it across all 4 edges of my panel. Really beat into it. I took some nicks out of it. I scruffed it up a lot, and I mean, at one point, part of the panel tore, which is just fine. So the idea just being to really age that bit of paper and give it a really old look. And so I'm really liking how this is coming together. It has nothing to do with Harry Potter at this point. So the scarf and the Harry Potter colors don't quite make much sense anymore. But I love the look of this just being very old worldy, and so I'm still gonna roll with my owl here. He's just so adorable and really fun to assemble. So I definitely want to make more of him and play with those eyes a little bit. For my sentiment, I am going to use the sentiment that came in the Better Press Club, and I used a Better Press ink. I think it's tawny, and I pressed out my sentiment. And my owl here, I'm gonna attach with some low profile foam and a little bit of 3D glue gel just in those areas that are kind of small, like the feet. And that way I don't have to worry about cutting little pieces of foam to get behind there. And because those little areas are more apt to maybe get caught on something, I do want to put adhesive to make sure it's well secured, but getting foam behind there is really, really tough. My 3D glue gel, just FYI, it's from Kalau, and it did discolor in the tube a little bit. It turned, usually it's clear, crystal clear, but I've used these little syringe tubes over and over and over again. Maybe it's time to swap them out for a new set, because there's something in there that's maybe contaminated the glue. It works just fine. It's just started to tint it a weird color. And so I don't know if that's some of the color that's like bleaching out from maybe the edge of the syringe. Not too sure. But just so that you know, usually that glue is clear. And it's one of my favorite glues to work with, and I always have links to it in the description box below. With the sentiment that comes in the Better Press Club, there is a coordinating die that will cut out that sentiment, like a nice close cut to it. So I've gone ahead and cut that out, but I've took the same die and cut it out of the same brown that I used as a matte layer to my card. And that way I can, they're the exact same size, but what I'm going to do is offset it a little bit where the solid brown becomes a bit of a drop shadow for this sentiment. That way it kind of lifts it off of the back of the card a little bit and hopefully makes it a little bit more prominent. And so that will finish up my layered card. Next, onto my interactive card. So I'm going to tell you right now, this card, I have made this interactive mechanism oodles of times before, but I had to do so many redos during the course of this card. It normally would not take very long, but this one took me forever to get done. But I'm leaving some of my mistakes in here just to talk through it so that you kind of know the things that you should be taking into account, which I completely forgot as I was doing this the first time through. And most notably, the double slider card, there are or mechanism, I should say, there are dies that you can buy to create this mechanism, but I always find it really easy to custom make one, especially since you can then make it the exact size that you need. So my idea is that these books that come from the large die of the month, I've stacked them. There's 4 in the stack, 3 that are closed books, and the topmost book is open. And the thought that I had was that I would have the stacks of books actually cover the mechanism here. And all I'm going to do is I measured, not precisely, just eyeballed about 1/4 of an inch on the left and the right. And then I am just cutting about 1/8 of an inch from the top and bottom, but I'm only cutting in between those 2 1/4 inch, what I call rails. And that gives you something that looks like this. It's like an I-beam or a bobbin, a spool of thread, however you like to think of it. But that's essentially the shape that we want. Because that middle section there, that's where I'm going to wrap some soft plastic. And that plastic becomes a conveyor belt. The conveyor belt is a mechanism that allows you to attach something to the front of it that will pull down in one direction, and then attach something to the back of it that will rise up as you pull down on your pull tab. So because everything is kind of attached to that conveyor belt, when one thing goes down, the other thing goes up, and vice versa. So that's basically your double slider card. Really easy to make. And in fact, I'm going to show you a second way of creating it because I did it wrong here. Actually, I made the mechanism correctly, but it's not the correct fit for this card. And I'll show you in a moment. Whenever I'm making any kind of interactive or pop-up card, what I like to do is a bit of dry fitting, just to make sure that before I glue anything down and before anything gets attached where I can't have any takebacks, I can actually test out the mechanism and really make sure that it's doing what I want it to do. And thank goodness that I always do this a little bit of dry fitting, so because I realized pretty late in the game that this mechanism isn't quite right. Now what I've done is I have cut down a pull tab, And this is from some nice 100-pound heavyweight cardstock. I definitely recommend a nice heavyweight cardstock for your pull tab because that's going to be what moves this whole thing. And you don't want it to be flimsy. You want it to be nice and sturdy, especially since it's only attached to the conveyor belt by one little 1/4-inch wide line of double-sided adhesive tape. So you definitely want to make sure that it's going to not wiggle back and forth and feel really, really strong. And that way, you know, whoever's going to be playing with this card, they don't have to feel like they need to be really precious with it. Then on the mechanism itself, I've put low profile foam just on those rails. So on the far left edge and far right edge. And I've done that on the top and on the bottom. Now with my pull tab, excuse me, my pull tab is way longer than it needs to be, and that's intentional. That's so that I can cut it down to fit. But what I want to do is as you pull the tab down, I want the house to pop up as if you've opened this book and this the story, the scene is just literally coming out of the pages and popping up through the open book. That was the idea behind this. Now, to achieve that, what I want is a way to attach this house. But if you look at the house, it's wider than that middle section. So what that means is that it's not actually going to slide all the way down because where I had the white foam, that's going to be where that interactive mechanism gets glued down to the card. So I had to redo this and try again. And that gives me the opportunity to show you a different way to create your mechanism. And that is you can just start with a rectangle, cut some 1/4-inch strips, and glue 2 1/4-inch strips on each side, one to the front and one on the back. And that's going to give you the exact same I-beam shape or, you know, bobbin or a spool of thread shape. Basically, it gives you that middle section that you can wrap some soft plastic around and 2 rails that keeps that plastic in place in the center there. Now, the key difference is on this second go around, it might be hard to notice because I don't have the other one side by side, but that middle section where my conveyor belt's going to be, it's wider. And in point of fact, when you're designing this and customizing it for what you want to do, it needs to be wider than the object that you want to pop up, especially if you need for that object to slide all the way down behind the mechanism completely, which is what I need for this house. So that was the big oopsie that I realized, but kind of late in the process. But I'm glad that I realized it before I glued anything else down, because making the mechanism again is pretty easy. So now that I have that, and I also want to mention, I keep saying soft plastic, and the reason is because some plastics, like I'm just using baggies that I get, and the one thing that I would say is like those cello bags that are usually what your stamps and dies are in, they're a little bit crunchy is my best way of describing it. So like if you were to crumple it in your hand, you can hear a real crunch to it, a real crinkle. Those aren't going to move as well because you have to be able to wrap this plastic around that middle section, and it needs to be able to smoothly kind of rotate. Now here's my second oopsie. See the stack of books here? It doesn't completely cover my mechanism. This one was an easy one to fix though. All I had to do was just make another book. So instead of a stack of 4 books, I have a stack of 5 books. And these are the things that you definitely want to take into consideration when you're customizing your double slider mechanism. But as you can see, some things are easier to recover from. Like this one, I just needed to add a little extra height. Now that it's so funny, this mechanism is a little bit of a Goldilocks complex. Initially, it was just the right height, but too narrow. And then my second one was wide enough, but then too tall. So now I've got it just right. And I've got another layer to go on top of my pull tab. And the reason is because instead of stamping the word pull, what I found from my stash, and this is from an APG die set, it is a die that actually cuts the word pull into your card. And so because my pull tab is the one that's already attached to my neck mechanism is a very, very light gray. It's not 100% white, but since it's light, I wanted to add a darker color to go on top. And that way the word pull is going to be more legible. There's going to be enough contrast to actually read that. And by adding this extra layer to the pull tab, it just strengthens the pull tab even more. So I've got 100-pound cardstock layered on top of that is 60-pound cardstock. So it's a nice, sturdy pull tab now. And that is now attached to my conveyor belt. And the way to attach it to your conveyor belt is push your conveyor belt all the way up to the top, because I want the pull tab in the default position to be at the top of the conveyor belt, and I want it to be able to move downwards initially. So where the seam is, where I wrapped that plastic around, that bit of tape that I put to attach the two open ends of the plastic, that's not going to be able to loop around to the back of the conveyor belt. So that's a stopping mechanism. And so by pushing it all the way to the top, that gives me essentially the starting position. And then I pulled it all the way down to give me the ending position. And then I attached my house to the conveyor belt. I did have to attach some additional cardstock to the bottom or to the back of my house to extend the bottom of it a little bit. And that way the house can actually be above that topmost book, because without that little bit of extra cardstock to extend the bottom of the house, it's going to always be partially blocked by the stack of books because it's attached to the mechanism, and the mechanism is completely covered by the stack of books. So now that I've got everything working the way that I want, I can now start gluing things together. So I did have a third oopsie on this card where I stamped the sentiment directly onto the my panel, but it didn't stamp perfectly. Thank goodness the clear stamp of the month does have coordinating dies for that particular sentiment, because it doesn't have coordinating dies for all of them, and so it almost looks intentional that that I had to restamp. And I just used the coordinating die to give it a really nice finish and glued it right over top the misstamp. So with all of my elements complete, I can now start to put everything together. Now I had just some repositionable tape holding my stack of books together, but I did go ahead and glue some cardstock behind all of those books so that I have something that's a little bit solid to work with as just one piece. And what I'm going to do is add some low profile foam to the far left edge and the far right edge of my stack of books here, but I have to double it up, because the mechanism, if you'll recall, on those rails, there's low profile foam on the bottom of the rails to attach it to the card base, and there's also low profile foam on the top of the rails. And the reason for that bit of foam is just to give a little bit of room for the pull tab, and in this case the house, to tuck behind and on top of the mechanism without it having too much tension against other layers of cardstock above or below it. And so that's why I had to double it up so that it actually, the stack of books at the very top will actually be nice and flush. And that is my interactive card finally complete. It took a little bit to get it there, but I got it across the finish line in the end. So now with my last card, this will be a pop-up card. And it's been a while since I've made one of these cards, and I definitely think I think there's an APG die set that will help you to create this mechanism, but it's pretty easy to do by hand. So I'm going to make a twist and pop card. And I'm starting off with a bit of cardstock. Now, I recommend something a little bit lighter weight, so maybe 60 to 80 pound would be good, because this is going to be folded and stacked 4 layers deep, and so lighter weight is better. And what I've done is cut this to 3.5 tall by 10 inches wide. Along the 10-inch edge, I scored and folded every 2.5 inches. So basically, you want to score and fold this in quarters so that it folds down in quarters. And I decided to round the edges. You don't have to do that, but I like the finish of it. This piece here is also cut to 10 inches wide and only 3 inches tall, not 3.5 tall. That way it's nice and hidden when we glue the other piece on top of it. And what I did is along the 10-inch edge, I scored in half at 5. Along the 3-inch edge, I scored in half at 1.5. Now comes the part that's going to make this twist and pop. So I need to score some diagonal lines. And to figure out where to score, I'm going to give myself some tick marks. So using the middle line, so that is the line that's along the 10-inch edge that we scored at 5 inches, I'm going to take that 5-inch line as my starting or my reference point. And I'm going to give myself a pencil mark 1.5 inches to the left of that 5-inch mark and 1.5 inches to the right of that 5-inch mark. And I'm going to do that at the top and at the bottom. So basically, you're going to have sort of marked out a 3-inch wide section that's completely centered. And I'm going to now put some score lines in where I connect those pencil marks. So I'm going to connect the top right to the bottom left, and I'm going to do the mirror of that, the top left to the bottom right. So that's going to make an X right through the center of our mechanism here. And I've gone ahead and folded it. Now, what you want to do is just exercise this a little bit. So you can fold it back, you can fold it forward, just to kind of soften that a little bit so that when it operates in the card, it's going to work a little bit more smoothly. Now, ultimately, how I'm collapsing and folding this down at the moment, it's not how you're going to fold it when you go to actually put this in your card, but I'll show you that later. For now, all I wanted to do was just to get those folds nice and softened a little bit. Now, with the panel here, I am going to, there's a couple different ways you can have this operate. So you can make a side folding, but really this is meant to be a top folding card where it opens up and the mechanism will expand outwards. So again, I'll show you that in a little bit more detail later when I actually go to put the mechanism, install it into the inside of my card. But for now, the thing that I wanted to achieve with this card, sort of that spark of an idea that I had that I wanted to run with, was I want to make a completely black and white card. And I saw in the clear stamp of the month that there are 3 gnomes, and there's a couple of sentiments that I felt like would be a great panel on this 4-panel twist and pop design here, because when this is all folded down, you have 4 panels that are 2.5 wide by 3.5 tall. And so you can decorate each of those 4 panels. So I thought that it would be cute to have the gnomes on 3 of the 4 panels and then have a sentiment on the 4th panel. And so that was sort of my idea. Twist and pop card that's black and white. And that's where I got started. So I did end up having to stamp out my sentiment a second time. I gotta say, with this set of cards, I had to do a lot of retakes on it, but well worth it in the end. And with this one, the thing that I didn't account for was I was actually just going to use the sentiment by itself. But the clear stamp of the month comes with some really fun sentiments, but there's also an image of a stack of books. And this sentiment I thought would look really, really cute sitting on top of that stack of books. So the sentiment reads, "Make this birthday one for the books." And so what I wanted to do was actually stack the books, the image of the books, right below the word books. And it looks great. It's just that because I didn't initially think about that, I didn't really space my sentiment very well on this bit of white cardstock that's going to be my 4th panel. And so I wasn't really too happy with that. And sometimes when I need time to just think about something and how I'm going to fix it, or if I'm just going to roll with it, I'd like to move on to another part of the card. So that's where I'm at now with figuring out the front of the card. And if you haven't noticed, Spellbinders is now carrying some beautiful paper pads from Paper Rose. And I know my friend Terry, who is Mama Chorizo on Instagram, she loves Paper Rose and also Craft Consortium. So in case anyone from Spellbinders is watching, that's another great brand of papers. But this particular paper pad, I have a few sheets from as a sample from Spellbinders, and it's all about text, typography, books, newspapers, and just print materials. So I thought that it worked out perfectly that I happened to get the sheet that has it's just edge to edge with bookcase of tons of books. And so that is what I'll be using as the front of my card. And I'm going to make some mats and layers for my sentiment. And at this point, I decided I'm actually going to redo that sentiment that I liked so much, but wasn't really positioned well. Because initially I was thinking, oh, I'll just stamp the sentiment anywhere, and then I can trim that piece of white cardstock down to whatever size it needs to be. So instead, just to get this to be a little bit more, I guess, aligned where I wanted, I cut the white panel to the exact size that I want it to be as I want to see it on my card. And then I'm going to stamp everything else. So that way I can really line it up, get it centered however I want. And I've got some of the additional little embellishment stamps. So this one is the little, kind of like the little twinkle, lights. So I've stamped that on as just like a little bit of accent. Now, originally, I was intending for that sentiment to go on the inside of my mechanism, which is now folded correctly. So you can see here, the way it's folded, you have that triangle that's a solid piece at the top. And then you have the twisty mechanism that are kind of like little legs. So this is how you want to properly fold your twist and pop mechanism. Then when you go to actually glue this into your card, you only want to put adhesive where that triangle is. And you want to put this right up against the fold of your card. Make sure you're not going over the fold of your card, because otherwise it's going to be really hard to close your card down. But once you have the bottom glued in, then you can just put some adhesive on the top triangle and then close your card right on top of it. And that ensures that your card will actually close down completely and nice and flat. So now to finish decorating the front of my card, I've got my pattern paper cut down to size, and I had distracted myself with installing the mechanism to give myself time to figure out what else I want to put on this card. And the conclusion I came to was that the sentiment I was originally intending for the inside of my card, I'm actually going to go ahead and use that on the outside of my card. I really love this black and white look. It's so striking and dramatic. And so I like the idea of keeping it really simple and just having the sentiment and no images or anything with it, besides the one that's I consider part of the sentiment, that stack of books. So I am keeping it nice and simple on the outside, which is often what I prefer with pop-up cards, because I feel like a lot of the fun of the card is going to be on the inside. And so I want to make sure that there's some good contrast there, where it's nice and simple on the outside and a lot more fun and interesting on the inside. And so now that I have stolen the sentiment that was meant to go on the inside of my card, I now have to create another sentiment to go on the inside. And actually, in fact, this actually turned out better for the theme of what's going on the inside, because on the outside, the sentiment is make this birthday one for the books, and it's got the lovely pattern paper from Paper Rose. And so that makes sense. It's really self-contained as an image. But the other sentiment that I found in this stamp set is gnomed out, you, books, and coffee are my favorite. And that works out great because of the punny play on words with gnome and all of the gnomes that are on this panel. And as well, I kind of lucked out a little bit where the gnome that is holding the coffee mug is the last gnome and is right next to where my sentiment panel will be. So that all actually worked out really well in the end. So I don't know why it didn't occur to me initially to use the sentiment that actually has the gnome punny sentiment in it, but I'm glad that things turned out the way they did, because ultimately I think it turned out for the better. I'm going to cut out all of the coloring so that you don't have to sit through that. So I am just going to finish up the coloring here, and I really want to keep with the black and white. So I am just coloring with some various gray tones. And I'm doing some very selective coloring, not really to try to make this look like a black and white photo at all, but more just to keep it balanced so that there isn't too much white. Because I felt with just the outline stamp, it looked unfinished. And by adding just a little bit of color here and there, color by way of gray, I guess, it helps to balance things out a little bit, so it doesn't look too, I guess, too flat or too, well, to me it looked unfinished, like it just wasn't a completed image. So I'm much happier with it now, and so now I can install it into the twist and pop mechanism. So what I did was I gave myself a pencil mark to mark the width. So that's 2.5 inches in from the edge. And when I go to attach this, I want to attach it to the bottom left. And I am only putting glue below the horizontal center line and within that pencil mark. Then I'm going to stack and close my folded panel, and I'm going to close the card down so that on the opposite end, the mechanism will adhere where it needs to in order for the card to fold completely flat. And so that's what my finished pop-up card looks like. Here's a final recap of all of the cards that I made today. So this is my flat card featuring the Better Press Club of the month, which I inked up with my Kaleidocolor ink pad from Sukaneko. It works beautifully to create this really easy ombre. And it does come with a coordinating die for the sentiment that does a close cut, but as well that shape die that you can layer or do some die cut inlaying as I've done on that card. This is my layered card, which features the owl from the small die of the month, the book from the large die of the month, the 3D embossing folder, and the very seam sentiment from the Better Press Club. And all of my cards today, I feel, have very different looks to them. Sometimes I get in the mode of a certain color scheme, and a lot of my flip cards end up looking very similar, but all of my cards today look pretty different from one another. And this is my interactive card, which is a double slider card, and it features the large die of the month, and the sentiment comes from the clear stamp and die of the month. So really, really fun double slider mechanism there. Took a while to get there, but I love the result. This final card features pattern paper from Paper Rose, and the sentiment is from the clear stamp of the month. And then on the inside, I have images from the clear stamp of the month. So in a lot of previous flip videos, the stamp of the month was often my go-to for flat cards. So I'm really happy that I was able to incorporate it into a pop-up card. And that was one of my goals for this flip video, was to use the stamp in a pop-up card. And I think this one turned out great. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you have a favorite card among these four, let me know that as well. Thanks so much for joining me today, and until next time, happy crafting and have a fabulous day. Bye.